The hook opening mystery and tension, the blackness of space stretched forever. Stars shone like tiny fires in the distance. Captain James sat in the cockpit of his small ship, the Starling, watching the control screens flicker with red warnings. Something was wrong. A loud alarm cut through the silence. "Engine failure," the computer voice said. James pulled the levers, tried to restart the thrusters, but nothing worked. The ship shook hard, throwing him against his seat. Sparks rained down from the control panel. Outside, a dark green planet spun slowly into view. He didn't have a choice. He guided the Starling toward the atmosphere. The ship burned through the sky, heat making the windows glow orange. James clenched his teeth as the ground came closer: trees, rivers, mountains. Then, with a deafening crash, the ship slammed into a forest. When James woke, the world was silent. The air was warm and heavy, smelling of wet leaves. His head hurt, and blood trickled down his cheek. The ship was broken, smoke rising from the metal. His communicator was dead. No signal. No rescue. James grabbed his survival pack and stepped outside. The forest was huge. Its tall, silver-leafed trees reached up like spears. Strange plants glowed faintly in the shadows. Somewhere far away, a bird-like cry echoed. He had to find water, food, and shelter before night came. Hours passed. James built a small fire near the crash site. The light pushed back the darkness, but it could not stop the feeling that something was watching him. He kept glancing into the trees, but saw nothing. Then a sound. Soft footsteps on leaves. Slow, careful. Coming closer, James stood up, heart pounding. "Who's there?" He called no answer. From between two trees, a figure stepped into the feed. She was tall, almost his height, with smooth silver skin that caught the glow of the flames. Her long hair shimmered like strands of glass. Her eyes were bright, almost too bright, and they studied him with calm intensity. She wore simple clothing made from animal hides, a curved blade strapped to her side. James froze. She was alien, there was no doubt. For a moment, they just looked at each other. James raised his hands slowly, showing he had no weapon. "I don't want trouble," he said softly. The woman tilted her head but said nothing. It was clear she didn't understand his language. Then, without warning, she walked closer. Her eyes moved over his campfire, his bag, his injured arm. She stopped only a few feet away, staring straight into his eyes. Her expression was unreadable, half curiosity, half judgment. James tried a smile, though his heart was still racing. "I'm James," he said, pointing to himself. She didn't repeat his name. Instead, she stepped around him, examining the shipwreck. Her movements were smooth, silent, like a hunter. Suddenly, she turned back to him. In one swift motion, she drew her curved blade. James's breath caught. His first instinct was to run, but his legs felt heavy. The alien woman stepped close again. The blade's edge hovered near his chest, not touching, but close enough that he could feel the cool metal. Her eyes searched his face, as if trying to decide something important. Finally, she lowered the weapon. She pointed to the forest, then to him, then made a slicing motion across her throat. James understood the message. This place is dangerous. You won't survive here. Before he could answer, she stepped back into the shadows and disappeared, as silent as she had arrived. The forest felt darker now. James sat by the fire, trying to calm his racing heart. Who was she? Why had she spared him? He knew one thing: he wasn't alone on this planet. And the look in her eyes told him she had the power to decide whether he lived or died. Somewhere out there, in the endless forest, she was still watching. And James didn't know if she was a friend or his greatest danger. **** First contact and cultural gap. The night passed slowly. The forest around James whispered with strange sounds, soft rustles, distant cries, and something like the hum of deep water. Sleep came in short bursts, always broken by the feeling that eyes were on him. By morning, the fire was only a pile of gray ash. James checked the wreckage again. Nothing worked. No food except a few emergency rations. He knew he had to explore, but the thought of the silver-skinned woman stayed in his mind. She had spared him, but her warning had been clear. He strapped on his pack and walked into the forest. The air was thick and warm, and the leaves made a silver shimmer when the light touched them. Insects with wings like glass buzzed past. He found a stream and bent to drink, but stopped, crossed the water. She was there. The alien woman stood still, one hand resting lightly on her blade. Her eyes followed his every move. James raised a hand. "Hello again," he said softly. She didn't speak. Instead, she crouched and touched the water, pointing at it, then at him, then back to the forest. He guessed she was telling him where to find water. He tried to cross the stream, but she raised her hand sharply, palm out, stopping him. She pointed to the ground near the bank, thin lines in the dirt. Tracks, large ones. Something big had been here. James stepped back, uneasy. She crossed the stream in a single leap and walked past him, scanning the trees. Her movements were like a predator, silent, controlled. Without warning, she threw a small stone into the bushes. A sudden hiss erupted, and a long-scaled creature slid out, snapping its jaws. Before James could react, her blade flashed in the light. One strike clean and fast, and the creature fell still. She looked at him, her expression calm, as if killing such things was normal. James swallowed hard. This woman lived in a world where danger was constant. He pointed to the dead creature. "Danger," he said. She tilted her head, repeating slowly, "Danger." Her voice was low, musical, but firm. It was the first word. She had spoken to him. Over the next hour, they walked together through the forest. She showed him plants with blue roots that were safe to eat, and ones with black flowers that could kill. She never smiled, never relaxed, but she didn't push him away either. James tried to learn her name. He pointed to her and said, "You?" She hesitated, then touched her chest. "Shira," she said. "Shira," James repeated. She gave a small nod, as if approving that he had said it correctly. By midday, they reached a clearing where tall stones stood in a circle. Shira motioned for him to sit. She pulled something from a leather pouch, tie thin strip of dried meat, and offered it. James took it with a small smile. "Thank you." She watched as he ate, then spoke a few words in her own language, soft, sharp syllables that meant nothing to him. When he didn't respond, she sighed and looked away, as if frustrated. It was then James realized something important. She wasn't just curious about him. She was judging him. Every step, every choice, she was measuring his worth. Later, they returned toward his crash site. Shira stopped just outside the clearing and pointed to the wreckage. She made a circle with her hands, then tapped her temple, then pointed to the forest again. He didn't fully understand, but he caught the meaning. "This is my world. You are in it now. Learn it, or die." Then she turned and walked into the trees, disappearing once again without a sound. James stood alone, heart still pounding. She hadn't promised to help him. She hadn't promised anything. But he felt the beginning of something he couldn't explain, an unspoken connection between them, fragile but real. And he knew, if he wanted to survive here, he needed her. But first, he had to earn her trust. Forced alliance. The second night on the alien planet came with a heavy sky. Dark clouds rolled over the forest, hiding the stars. The wind carried strange scents, wet soil, metallic rain, and something else. Something alive. James sat by his fire, trying to make the small flames last. The forest around him was too quiet. Even the insect sounds had stopped. He remembered enough from survival training to know that sudden silence usually meant danger. He reached for the small metal rod he had sharpened into a spear. His eyes scanned the shadows, searching for movement. Then, from somewhere in the darkness, came a deep growl. James stood slowly, muscles tight. The growl grew louder, closer, circling him. The firelight showed nothing, but he could feel that something big was out there. A sudden rush of wind passed behind him. He turned sharply and saw two glowing yellow eyes staring at him through the trees. They were low to the ground, but moving fast. Before he could react, the creature leaped into the light. It was massive, its body like a wolf crossed with a reptile. Long claws digging into the earth, rows of sharp teeth glistening in its open jaws. Its skin shimmered with scales that shifted color like liquid metal. James froze. The spear in his hands felt too small, too weak. The beast stepped closer, growling deep from its chest, and then a blur of silver dropped from the trees above. It was Shira. She landed between James and the beast, her curved blade drawn. Her eyes were locked on the predator, unblinking, cold as stone. The creature lunged, but she moved like lightning, slashing at its side. The blade cut deep, and the beast howled, spinning to attack her. James' heart pounding, rushed forward with his spear. He jabbed at the creature's neck, just enough to make it stumble back. For a moment, man and alien stood side by side, weapons ready. The beast circled them, muscles tense, looking for an opening. It struck again, this time faster. Shira ducked under its snapping jaws and slashed across its legs. James jabbed the spear into its side. Blood thick and black splashed onto the ground. The predator roared, staggering backward. Its eyes flashed once more before it turned and vanished into the shadows, its heavy footsteps fading into the distance. James stood there, breathing hard, hands shaking. Shira lowered her blade but kept her eyes on the trees, making sure it was truly gone. When she finally turned to him, her expression was different, still serious, but softer. "You fight," she said in slow English. James gave a small laugh, more from relief than humor. "Only because you were here." She tilted her head as if considering his words. Then she stepped closer and pointed to his arm, where a long scratch bled slowly. Without asking, she pulled a small cloth from her belt and wrapped it tightly. James watched her work. Her hands were quick but careful, her touch firm yet gentle. When she was done, she looked him in the eyes and said a single word. In her own language. He didn't understand it, but her tone was approving. They returned to the fire together. Shira sat this time, though she kept her weapon within reach. James offered her a piece of ration bread. She studied it for a moment before taking a bite. For the first time, they sat in silence that wasn't tense or threatening. James realized something important. Tonight, she had chosen to fight beside him. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. It was the first fragile thread of trust between them. But he also knew something else on this planet. Danger was never far away. And if they were to survive, they would need each other far more. Then either of them was ready to admit learning and curiosity the days after the predator attack passed slowly. But something had changed. Shira came to James's camp every morning. She never said why. Sometimes she brought small gifts, seedable roots, strips of dried meat, or a pouch of glowing berries that tasted sweet. Sometimes she arrived empty-handed, but stayed close, watching him as he worked on fixing pieces of his ship. James didn't ask her to explain. He knew she was still deciding if she could trust him, and in truth, he was still trying to understand her. On the fourth morning, Shira approached with a long wooden stick in her hands. She tapped the ground twice to get his attention, then held out the stick. "For you," she said in slow, careful English. James took it, noticing the sharpened end. A spear. She nodded. Better than this. She pointed at the bent metal rod he had been using. He smiled. Thank you, Shira. She didn't smile back, but there was a flicker in her eyes' approval. Maybe even pride. They began to teach each other, though neither planned it. When James tried to teach her English words, she was quick to repeat them, but slow to use them in conversation. She seemed careful, as if she didn't want to make a mistake. One afternoon, as they sat by the stream, he pointed to the water. Water, he said. Water, she repeated. He pointed to the sky. Sky, sky. Sky, sky. Then she touched her chest. Shira, he smiled and tapped his own chest. James. She tilted her head slightly, then said, Jem. Close enough, he laughed. But the learning wasn't one-sided in the forest. Shira taught him which plants could be eaten, which could heal, and which could kill with a single touch. She showed him how to weave thin leaves into rope strong enough to hold his weight. She taught him how to walk without making a sound, how to watch for movement in the corner of his eye. One afternoon, she led him to a tree with bright red bark. She scraped off some powder and pressed it into a cut on his hand. It stung sharply, but she shook her head when he tried to pull away. Heal, she said simply. Sure enough, the pain faded within minutes. Still, Shira remained distant in some ways. She didn't talk about herself, her people, or her past. Whenever James asked, she changed the subject or pretended not to understand. One evening he asked, Why did you help me that night? With the predator? She looked at the fire for a long moment, then met his eyes. You not ready to die? She said at last. James wasn't sure if it was a compliment or just an observation, but it made him curious. There were moments when he caught her studying him, her gaze lingering longer than before. Once, as he tried to fix a broken panel from his ship, she reached out and touched the smooth metal surface. Her fingers traced the strange symbols on the controls. Your world, she said. Yes, James nodded. Far from here. She looked at him then, her eyes sharp but searching. You? Go back. The question surprised him. He hesitated. Before answering, maybe, but not without saying goodbye to you first. Her expression didn't change, but she turned away quickly, as if hiding a thought. Over time, their silent moments became less heavy. They shared food without suspicion. They walked together without always looking over their shoulders. The air between them began to feel different, less like two strangers forced together by survival, and more like something else. But even as this bond grew, James sensed a barrier around her heart. Something in her past kept her from stepping closer. He didn't know it yet, but breaking that barrier would change both their lives forever. Breaking the barrier, the air was heavy that evening. The sky had turned a deep greenish gray, and the wind carried a low, distant rumble. Even the trees seemed uneasy, their silver leaves shaking in a restless rhythm. James was at the crash site, sorting through bits of metal when Shira appeared at the edge of the clearing. She looked tense, her eyes scanning the clouds. What is it? James asked. She pointed to the sky. Storm. He glanced upward. Looks bad. She shook her head sharply. Not bad. Very bad. Before he could ask more, a sudden flash of light tore across the sky, followed by a deep, rolling thunder that made the ground vibrate. The smell of ozone filled the air. Shira crossed the clearing quickly, grabbing his arm. Come, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. They moved fast through the forest, the wind growing stronger with every step. Leaves and dust swirled around them. In the distance, lightning forked through the clouds, turning the forest silver for an instant before darkness returned. Finally, Shira led him to the mouth of a cave hidden behind a curtain of vines. Inside it was cool and dry, the stone walls glowing faintly from patches of bioluminescent moss. James dropped his pack, catching his breath. "You've done this before, haven't you?" She gave a short nod. "Storms here. Not safe. Wind can kill. Sky fire can burn whole forest." The rain began soon after. At first, it was only a steady patter, but it quickly grew into a roar as sheets of water hammered the earth outside. The cave entrance blurred behind a curtain of rain. Shira sat near the wall, her legs crossed, her blade resting on her knees. James sat across from her, rubbing his hands for warmth. Then the temperature dropped suddenly, and a sharp wind blew into the cave mouth. Without a word, Shira pulled a thick fur from her pack and spread it on the floor. She gestured for him too. "Come closer." James hesitated for a moment, but the cold was biting. He sat beside her, feeling the warmth radiating from her body. For a while, they sat in silence, listening to the storm. The only light came from the glowing moss, painting her skin in soft green tones. James found himself studying the lines of her face, the calm strength in her jaw, the sharp intelligence in her eyes. "You've saved me more than once now," he said quietly. Shira didn't answer at first. She was staring into the rain. Finally, she said, "I did not want to." James blinked, unsure how to take that. "Then why?" She turned to face him fully. "Because something in you is different. Not like others I have seen." He leaned forward slightly. "Others." Her eyes darkened, as if remembering something painful. "Long ago, strangers came here, took what they wanted, hurt my people. They did not care who lived or died." James felt a heaviness in his chest. "And you thought I was the same?" She nodded at first. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "But you share food. You risk life for me. You see me, not just what I can do for you." There was a pause. The wind howled outside. But inside the cave it felt strangely still. James didn't know what to say, so he simply said, "You matter to me, Shira." Her gaze locked on his, sharp and searching, as if she was testing the truth of his words. After a long moment, she looked down at the fur between them. "My people, they do not speak of feelings, only survival. No choice, no trust, no closeness." She struggled for the last word, as if it was strange on her tongue. James's voice was soft. "It doesn't have to be that way." For a long time, she didn't reply. But then, slowly, she shifted closer, until their shoulders touched. It was not a grand gesture, not a sudden embrace, just a simple, quiet closeness. But James knew it meant more than words could. Outside, the storm raged, tearing through the forest. Inside the cave, a barrier had cracked. Not broken completely, but cracked enough for light to begin slipping through. And James had the feeling that after tonight, nothing between them would be the same. Awakening, the storm passed by. Morning, leaving the forest wet and quiet. Mist curled through the silver trees, and the air smelled fresh, almost sweet. James stepped out of the cave first, scanning for danger. Shira followed, her eyes still alert, though her movements seemed less tense than usual. They walked back to the crash site together. The ground squelched under their boots, and the leaves dripped rainwater like tiny streams. For the first time since he had met her, Shira didn't walk several steps ahead. She stayed close, as if the space between them now felt different. That day, they worked side by side. James gathered broken metal panels, hoping to salvage something. From the wreckage, Shira knelt nearby, weaving thin ropes from plant fibers. Occasionally, their eyes met. Neither spoke much, but the silence felt comfortable. At midday, Shira brought him a small fruit, shaped like a star. She cut it in half and offered the brighter piece to him. "Taste," she said. James bit into it. The flavor burst across his tongue, sweet. At first, then warm, almost like cinnamon. He grinned.
Us!
Amazing. Shira watched him carefully, as if memorizing his reaction. Then she took a bite of her own half, chewing slowly. Good, she agreed. It was such a small moment, but it stayed with him. She was starting to share not just resources, but experiences over the next days. Their connection deepened in quiet ways. James told her stories from earth-about cities with tall glass buildings, oceans stretching farther than the eye could see, and music that filled entire halls with sound. She listened without interrupting, her head tilted slightly, as if she was seeing it all in her mind. Sometimes she asked questions in her slow, careful English. "Ocean is like big river." "Much bigger," James explained, spreading his arms wide, water everywhere. "You can't see the other side." Her eyes widened slightly. "No land." "Sometimes no land for days." She was silent for a moment, then said softly, "I would like to see." In return, Shira began to speak of her own world, not in long stories, but in fragments. She told him how her people lived in small tribes, always moving, always hunting. How trust was rare and showing weakness was dangerous. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she said, "When I was young, I asked my mother why no one stayed together always. She'll say, 'Cause staying is dangerous. You lose people, you hurt." James watched the way her eyes dropped to the fire, as if she was hiding something deeper. "And you believed her?" She hesitated. "I did, till now." Her words stayed with him all night. The next day, they were by the stream, refilling water containers, when James slipped on the wet rocks and nearly fell in. Shira caught his arm quickly, steadying him. For a moment, they were very close, so close he could see the tiny flecks of gold in her eyes. Instead of stepping back immediately, she studied his face. Her gaze lingered not with suspicion, but with curiosity. "And something else. You are strange," she said finally. James raised an eyebrow. "Strange good or strange bad?" Her lips curved just slightly, not quite a smile, but close. "Strange. Different?" That night, as they sat near the fire, Shira reached into her pouch and pulled out a thin silver chain with a small crystal pendant. She turned it in her fingers, the firelight catching its edges. "This is from my mother," she said. "I keep always." She placed it in his palm for a moment, letting him see it up close, then took it back and slipped it over her neck again. It wasn't a gift, but it was something more important, a sign of trust. For someone like Shira, who had built her life on walls and distance, that was a powerful step. James began to notice more small changes. She laughed softly, but real when he made a clumsy joke. She corrected his pronunciation when he tried her language, sometimes teasing him when he got it very wrong. The way she looked at him had shifted. Before, her gaze was like a hunter judging prey. Now, it was searching for something, or perhaps trying to understand feelings she'd never had before. And though neither of them said it aloud, James knew. Shira's view of closeness, of what it meant to share yourself with another, was slowly awakening into something new. Asterisk. The new path of sun rose pale and thin over the silver forest. Mist hung low, curling between the trees like soft smoke. James was at the edge of the clearing, checking the last piece of wiring on his emergency beacon. It had taken him days to rebuild from the wreckage, and last night, for the first time, it had given a faint signal. Today, it was ready to send a full distress call. He turned it over in his hands, feeling the weight of what it meant. Somewhere out there, a rescue ship could be waiting for this signal. It could take him back to Earth, to oceans, cities, and the life he knew before. Behind him, he heard soft footsteps. Shira stepped into the clearing, carrying a bundle of roots and berries. She glanced at the beacon, then at him. "It works?" she asked in her slow but steady English. "Yes," he said quietly. "It works." She didn't answer right away. Her gaze drifted to the trees, as if searching for something in the distance. "If you call, you leave." James took a breath. Yes. They stood in silence for a long moment. The air between them felt heavier than any storm they had weathered. Finally, Shira spoke. "When you came here, I did not trust you. I thought you would take like others before." Her voice was calm, but there was a tremor under it. "Oh. But you gave, you stayed. You made me see different." James stepped closer. "And you made me see things differently too. You showed me strength I didn't know existed. Not just strength to fight, but to care, even when it's hard." Her eyes met his then. The barrier that had always been there was gone now. From deep within the forest came the sound of her people's hunting horns, low, haunting notes that rose and fell like the wind. She looked toward the sound, then back at him. "If I go with you, I leave them, my tribe, my life. And if you stay?" James asked gently. She hesitated, then said, "I go back to only surviving." James felt his chest tighten. "You deserve more than just survival, Shira." He activated the beacon. A soft hum filled the clearing as the signal pulsed upward into the sky. Somewhere above the clouds, it would reach a passing ship. Rescue would come in hours, maybe less. Shira watched the thin beam fade into the daylight. Her hand tightened on the strap of her pouch. "You have choice," James said quietly. "You can stay, or you can come with me. But whatever you choose, I'll remember you." For a long moment, she didn't move. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, she stepped toward him. Her hand reached for his, not quickly. Not in desperation, but with steady purpose. Her fingers slid into his, warm and sure. "I am tired of only surviving," she said. "I want to learn what you call living." James smiled, not the smile of victory, but of relief. "Then we'll learn it together, on the rescue." Ship broke through the clouds hours later, its engines rumbling across the forest. James and Shira stood side by side. She didn't look back at the trees or the shadows where her old life waited. She looked forward. Toward the unknown sky, her hand still in his. The journey ahead would not be easy. She would face a world of strange sights, unfamiliar rules, and people who might not understand her. But for the first time, she was ready not just to survive, but to live, to feel, to choose. And James knew that whatever world they stepped into next, they would face it not as strangers, but as something far greater. Asterisk beyond the stars, the rescue ship's engines hummed like a heartbeat as it cut through the atmosphere, leaving the silver forests behind. James sat by the window, watching the planet shrink into a small, glowing sphere. It felt strange to leave a place that had almost killed him, and yet had given him something far greater. Across from him, Shira sat upright, her hands resting on her knees. She wore a plain gray travel tunic, now given to her by the ship's crew. Her eyes stayed fixed on the view outside, not the planet, but the stars beyond. For the first time, she was leaving her world. The crew kept their distance from her. They whispered in the corridors, stealing cautious glances. An alien passenger was rare enough, but one traveling with a human, side by side, was almost unheard of. James noticed the way Shira's shoulders stiffened when they looked at her too long. He moved to sit beside her. First trip through space. He asked lightly. She tilted her head. First, everything. He chuckled softly. It can be overwhelming at first, but it's beautiful too. She looked back at the stars. They are endless. Her voice was quieter now, almost reverent. I thought my world was big. I was wrong. That night, the ship drifted through a dark region where no nearby stars shone. The observation deck was nearly empty when James found her there, standing. Alone. It feels strange, she said, without turning. No trees, no sky. Only nothing. James stepped closer. It's not nothing. It's space. And out there are thousands of worlds. Each one different. Each one with people, cities, oceans, mountains. She looked at him now, and danger. He smiled faintly. Yes, but also chances to live. To learn, to feel more than just fear. Their journey took 3 days. During that time, James introduced her to things she had never imagined are official food from a replicator. Music from Earth and holographic maps of the galaxy. The first time she heard human musica. Slow, haunting piano melody. She sat perfectly still, her eyes half closed. It speaks, she murmured. To what? James asked. She touched her chest lightly. Here, when they finally reached the space station, the sight made her draw in a sharp breath. It was massive, endless ring of lights spinning slowly against the backdrop of stars. The docking bay bustled with ships of all shapes and sizes. Voices in dozens of languages filled the air. People and alien beings moved together in a constant flow. Trading goods, greeting old friends. Rushing to their next destination. Xira stayed close to James, her eyes scanning everything. Some stared at her openly, others avoided looking at her. At all, James leaned in and whispered, "Ignore them. You're with me now." She gave a small nod, but didn't take her hand from the hilt of the short blade. She still carried. They spent the first night in a small cabin on the station. James was arranging supplies when he noticed Shira standing at the window again, staring out at the swirl of ships. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She was quiet for a long time before answering. "Before, my life was only path I knew. Hunt, eat, survive. Now, I feel like there are many paths, but I do not know where they go." James stepped beside her. "That's the best part. We get to choose." She glanced at him. "We. Of course," he said with a small smile. "Unless you've decided you're tired of me already." For the first time, she laughs, soft but warm. Not yet. What neither of them knew was that their choice of path would come sooner than expected. Because deep within the station's market, someone had already noticed the silver-skinned alien woman traveling with a human. Someone who knew exactly where she came from, and someone who had reasons to bring her back whether she wanted to go or not. Shadows of the past. The market on the space station was alive with color and noise. Stalls overflowed with glowing fabrics, strange fruits, and devices James couldn't name. Vendors called out in dozens of languages, their voices echoing through the high metal corridors. James and Shira moved through the crowd slowly. He pointed out new foods, explaining what he could. She moved silently beside him, her eyes never still. Every detail seemed to catch her attention, the way light shifted across a holographic display. The scent of cooked spices in the air, the strange rhythm of alien speech. For a while, she seemed almost at ease. But then James noticed her shoulders tighten. "What is it?" he asked quietly. Her gaze was fixed on a stall at the far end of the market. 2 figures stood there, cloaked in dark fabric. They weren't browsing, they were watching. Shira's voice was low. "Hunters." James frowned. "Hunters, like bounty hunters." She didn't answer right away. "They are from my world, from another tribe." Her eyes narrowed. "They take back those who leave, and punish them." James felt a knot form in his stomach. "Punish? How?" Her gaze stayed locked on the figures. "They will make me disappear, and they will make it hurt first." One of the cloaked figures began moving toward them, slow but deliberate. "Come on," James said, taking her hand. They slipped into the thickest part of the crowd, weaving between vendors and travelers. James kept glancing over his shoulder. One hunter was following them now. The second staying near the stall, probably to block an escape route. "Can you fight them?" James asked as they turned down a narrow side corridor. "Yes," Shira said flatly. "But not here. Too many people. Too much blood." Her tone was calm, but her grip on his hand was tight enough to hurt. They took another turn and found themselves in a quieter section of the station rows of storage doors and dim, flickering lights. James slowed. "We can't run forever. We need a plan." Before Shira could answer, a voice spoke from behind them. "You should not have left, Shira of the Ember Clan." They turned. The first hunter stood in the shadows, who'd pulled back just enough to reveal a face marked with dark, jagged tattoos. His eyes were sharp, his smile cold. "You were promised to the Wraith Lord," the hunter said. "You will return, or you will be returned." James stepped forward. "She's not going anywhere with you." The hunter's gaze slid over James, like he wasn't worth noticing. "And you are someone who's not going to let you take her." The hunter's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You do not understand, human. She is property of her tribe, and the tribe does not forget." James felt Shira shift beside him. Her voice was like steel. "I am no one's property." The hunter moved fast, too fast for James to react, but Shira was faster. Her curved blade flashed into her hand, blocking his strike with a sharp clang of metal. The sound rang through the corridor. They locked eyes, weapons pressing against each other. The hunter's grin vanished. "You have learned tricks from your human, but it will not save you." James scanned the hallway. Shadows moved at the far end. The second hunter was coming. "Go," Shira said without looking at him. "I'm not leaving you." James replied. She pushed back hard, forcing the first hunter a step away, then reached for James's arm. "Then run with me." They turned, and bolted boots slamming against the metal floor. Behind them, the hunters gave chase, their footsteps echoing like drums of war. They didn't stop until they burst into a crowded docking bay. The air was full of engine smoke and shouted orders. James spotted a small cargo shuttle loading supplies. "This way," he yelled. They sprinted up the ramp just as the hatch began to close. The pilot shouted something in protest, but James shoved a handful of credits into his hand. "Take off now." The pilot didn't ask questions. The engines roared, and the shuttle lifted from the bay, spinning away from the station. Through the small rear window, James saw the hunters appear on the docking platform, their cloaks whipping in the wind. They didn't shout. They didn't shake their fists. They just stood there, watching as if they knew this wasn't over. Shira stood beside him, breathing hard. "They will follow," she said simply. James nodded. "Then we stay ahead of them." But deep down, he knew the truth. They weren't just running now. They were being hunted. Asterisk, asterisk, the hunt across the stars. The cargo shuttle shuddered as it broke free from the station's orbit. Stars streaked past the windows in long white lines before snapping back into pinpoints as the pilot engaged the jump drive. James leaned back in his seat, his chest still tight from the run. Across from him, Shira sat perfectly still, but her eyes were sharp, alert, scanning every shadow in the cabin. "They'll track us," she said at last. "They can't know where we're going," James replied. She shook her head. "Hunters don't need to know. They follow. Always." The shuttle made its first stop in a mining colony on the edge of a red dwarf star. The air was hot and dry, the sky a constant dull crimson. They blended into the crowds for a while, moving through narrow streets lined with vendors and repair shops. But Shira's instincts stayed sharp. She would stop suddenly, her head tilting, her eyes following a figure that disappeared around a corner. James noticed it too, the same pattern of movement. The same feeling of eyes on them. They didn't linger. By nightfall, they had bought passage on another ship. This one headed toward a green world called Vallis 4. Vallis 4 was a paradise compared to the mining colony. Blue oceans glimmered under golden sunlight. Towering crystal towers rose above white sand beaches. The air smelled of flowers and salt water. For a moment, James thought they might be safe here. They weren't. 2 days after their arrival, as they walked through a quiet coastal market, Shira's hand froze mid-reach toward a piece of fruit. Her gaze locked on a reflection in a polished metal stall wall. A hooded figure, watching. "They're here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. James followed her gaze. His pulse spiked.
"Oh."
"Doesn't matter," Shira cut in. "We move." They slipped into a side street, weaving between tall buildings of glass and stone. The ocean breeze carried the sound of waves, but behind it came the faint, steady echo of footsteps. The hunters weren't rushing. They didn't need to. They knew their prey was cornered. By night, James and Shira hid in a crumbling tower at the edge of the city. From the balcony, the ocean stretched endlessly, silver under the moonlight. "They won't stop," James said quietly. "So we make them." Shira looked at him, surprised. "You want to fight them?" "I'm tired of running," he admitted. "We can't keep jumping from world to world forever. If we end this now, they will send more," Shira interrupted. "Hunters are not alone. They serve the Wraith Lord. If we kill these, others will come. Stronger." James's jaw tightened. "Then we need something they can't follow, a place they won't go." For the first time since they left the station, Shira's eyes softened slightly. "There is such a place. But it is dangerous. More dangerous than hunters." James almost smiled. "We've survived worse." She didn't smile back. The next morning, they left Vallis 4 on a small fishing vessel, heading out into open sea. Hours later, a disguised transport ship met them offshore. Its captain, a scarred old trader with one cybernetic eye, owed Shira a favor from long ago. When James asked where they were going, Shira's answer was simple: "Through the shattered veil." The captain spat over the railing at the words. "No one sane goes there." "Exactly," Shira said. The shattered veil was a region of space few dared to cross, a storm of shattered asteroids, magnetic fields, and dark energy clouds that swallowed ships whole. Navigation was near impossible, and sensors failed without warning. But it was also a place the hunters feared as their ship approached. James looked out the viewport. The stars seemed to vanish ahead, replaced by a roiling wall of black and violet light. Like a living storm in space. "You're sure about this?" he asked. Shira's gaze didn't waver. "If we make it through, they won't follow. And if we don't?" She paused. "Better to die free than live as property." Behind them, James saw faint shapes in the distance, 2 small hunter craft. Closing fast, there was no more time to debate. The captain pushed the ship forward. The black storm of the shattered veil swallowed them whole. The view outside became shards of rock spinning past at impossible speeds, lightning arcing silently across the darkness, and flashes of strange shapes moving within the storm. Somewhere behind, the hunters followed, but not for long, because the shattered veil had a way of deciding who was allowed to pass and who would be lost forever.